Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the Go 24/7 podcast, a recruiting spin today. So if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to hit that like, subscribe button, or if you're listening wherever you get your podcast, make sure to follow and set up those notifications. Sonny Shipp alongside. My name is Bryce Koon, and Sonny, man, we're getting ready for high school football to officially kick off here in the next couple of days. It's going to be really exciting to watch a lot of these guys, but recruiting on LSU's front had a nice little end to the month of July, early August. LSU obviously got good news with Caden Durham committing, Colin Simmons choosing to go to Texas. We're going to touch on that. But overall, I think we got to start off here. We talked a lot about it on the board. The conversations have been had, but maybe, closer to a week out now of all this information. Is the Colin Simmons race officially over, in your opinion, or with Caden Durham, and don't forget about Dak Moore as well, committing out of that 2025 group, can they help recruit that, or do you feel like this is kind of a done deal and that LSU needs to set their sights elsewhere?
Well, I think when you look at it, is there ever a done deal in recruiting? I don't, even until they sign on the dotted line, and then you have to worry about the transfer portal and coaches slotting into DMs and all that stuff. But I don't think it's over. I do think that when Colin Simmons when he made his commitment, you look at the quote that really stood out to I think a lot of people, as he said that he thought about his family and going to Texas put his family in the best position. So I think that's pretty telling right there of how strong he is in that commitment to Texas, knowing how much he puts into family with his younger brother and what he's dealing with and things of that nature. So I wouldn't say I wouldn't say it's completely over. Who knows what could happen? Sark could go 4-8 this year, 5-7. The people get restless, the boosters get restless, and things like that. So, I think LSU has a large large hill to climb. And they have such good relationships, particularly Sherman Wilson and his relationship that he has with Duncanville and with all the other prospects and stuff. LSU's going to always be around because of Caden Durham. DeCorian Moore is already committed. So there's always going to be a strong LSU presence at Duncanville, whether it's coaches making their trips over there to go watch them on Friday nights, whether it's going to be making visits there during the recruiting period in November and December when coaches can get back out on the road. So they're always going to be in Colin Simmons' ear to some extent, but I would say it's a steep hill to climb.
Steep hill and climb indeed. We talked about Caden Durham. It's kind of been talked a lot about. But when you look back at this DeCorian Moore commitment, I mean, to go ahead and land what is one of the top players of the 2025 class, what does it say to the work of Cortez Hankton and maybe this recruiting staff as a whole to go ahead and nab a guy that many feel like can be one of those elite playmakers, not only just at LSU, but anywhere he might have gone?
Yeah, and an interesting note with Moore is during the spring, he put out, I can't remember if it was a top 5 or what it was, but he had mentioned 5 schools, and LSU wasn't one of them that he had mentioned. But he did follow up and say that he did plan on visiting LSU. So obviously that tells you where LSU was in a kind of in his pecking order and in his mind. But they got him on campus for the Bayou Splash July 28th. He stayed all through the weekend and left there with a totally different feel and a totally different vibe. He spent a lot of one-on-one time with Cortez Hankton while he was there. You had Caden Durham and Colin Simmons there. So you had that, you had the home at Duncanville at a place that he could obviously see as his new home at LSU. So, it's going to be interesting to see how his recruitment, how it unwinds, how it shakes out over these next 18, 19 months, because you don't go into a state like Texas, grab the number 1 player, and then everything is just cut and dry. Texas A&M, TCU, Baylor, all those guys, the big boys over there, they're not just going to let him fly off to the wayside. So, there's going to be a heated recruiting battle involved in this. Obviously, LSU holds on to Caden Durham. I think that gives them, that will help them, along with the process of Moore, because you just have that, LSU presence back at Duncanville. And so that's going to be an interesting battle to follow over these next 18, 19 months. And, with Texas moving over We saw it a little bit to a lesser degree with Texas A&M when they moved over to the SEC. Now with Texas moving over to the SEC, I think you're going to really see some heated recruiting battles, not only between LSU and Texas now, and LSU and Texas A&M, but I think really crossing over between the three of them.
Yeah, especially as those matchups start to become more frequent starting in 2024. Obviously, a big opportunity for, kids that are maybe interested in Texas this season, if they do make that trip to Tuscaloosa to watch Alabama play Texas and kind of get more familiarized with that, Oklahoma as well. You talk about the state of Texas, and LSU's not quite done there either. They're trying to vie for the commitment of Blake Ivy. And Sonny, right now, the crystal ball predictions are not in the Tigers' favor. 3, in fact, including Steve Wiltfong with Texas A&M. Wanted to get some of your thoughts on where does LSU stand with Ivy ahead of his commitment. He's committing this weekend, August 19th. Where does this stand, and how badly do you think LSU needs Blake Ivy?
Well, he's another guy who was in town for that Bayou Splash recruiting event, and he left there, went to Texas A&M. I think it's been those two schools kind of at the top fighting for him the most here lately. And since he visited for the Bayou Splash, heard some positive reports on him and stuff. But you always heard that A&M chatter that he was an A&M lean. He was A&M was the team to beat. And then coming off here, made some calls even this morning. And there's still some positive vibes coming from the LSU side and coming on the LSU angle. And so I don't think it's as nearly as one-sided as it may seem with him, shutting a case that's already closed down and he's headed to A&M. I think that if LSU and Brad Davis, obviously we're recording this on a Thursday, so you got roughly around 48 hours or so before he makes a decision. And I think that this is definitely that Davis has LSU deep in the woods on this one. And, now it's going to be a matter of, okay, can you come out, can you pull a surprise? Can you pull a number 7 offensive tackle in the country on the composite? Although I think he's more of an interior guy, but still, an impressive offensive lineman that, that really looks good on paper and that looks good on film too.
We talked a lot about offensive line in this 2024 class. It's not something that LSU's necessarily gone heavy on. When you see this, how much of an impact would Ivy make in this class? You mentioned maybe more of an interior guy. How much of an impact would it make if they can nab him and kind of secure? Would they be done there, or is that something they continue to look to add on?
Well, I think he would be the 4th offensive lineman if he would jump on board. Weston Davis, a guy who's committed to Texas A&M, he's from right there in the Beaumont area. I think that he's someone else that, although he's committed to A&M, I think he's someone that you'll continue to see LSU pursue just because of where the staff felt that it was when he was getting ready to, or they felt that he was prepared to make a decision. A lot of people thought he was headed to LSU. Of course, he committed to Texas A&M instead. So I think he's a guy that you'll always have to kind of keep there in the back of your mind too. But if they could get 5, because going into it, I had them needing 5 to 6 in this class, and that obviously could include the transfer portal. But looking at the roster, looking at some projections that I've made, I've got them. I have them with I think it's 13 offensive linemen on scholarship after this season. And that puts you kind of right around that sweet spot that you want to be in, 16 to 17. I think that, that would help them get to that number right there.
Yeah, and it kind of fits into the narrative that Brian Kelly talked about in the press conference yesterday about needing probably 7 to 8 guys that can play and allowing for some of those guys in that 13, 16 range to be able to develop next year. You don't have to have them on the field next season. You can let some of those guys kind of continue to develop. Another name, Sonny, that we're going to continue to keep an eye on, and LSU fans really, and this is one that if you spend any time on our boards, you can tell how LSU fans feel about this one. It's Dominic McKinley, obviously an in-state product here. This is kind of where I sit, and I'm going to let you talk on this, but there seems to be, from the fan base side of things, maybe a little more desperation to get McKinley to commit after losing out on Colin Simmons. Do you feel that desperation maybe from the LSU staff to maybe now nab in McKinley, Or is this just, continuing to try to build that relationship? It does kind of feel like there does still need to be some work to be done before that September 1st commitment date.
Yeah, two different positions. Simmons, obviously the outside linebacker, and Jack McKinley, an inside guy. I think when you have a 5-star in your own backyard, that the importance is already there. You know that you've got to take care of what's in your backyard first before you can go, outside the state. Now, LSU had been mentioned with Simmons for so long to where I think from a fan base perspective that, that his name may carry a little more weight. But I think when you look at the LSU staff, no, it's, hey, we wanted Colin Simmons. I don't think that LSU absolutely needed to get Colin Simmons just because of some of the depth that they have at Jack linebacker, especially if Deshaun Womack, ends up moving back to that position, like I think he's going to. But when you look at Dominic McKinley, he's in your state. He's an hour away from your campus. He's in an area in Acadiana that hasn't really had a lot of great LSU vibes of late. You had Derek Williams, who went to Texas last year. You had Danny Lewis, who was also from Westgate, who chose Alabama over LSU. Of course, Walker Howard and Jack Besh, they came to LSU. Didn't last all that long, and then both left. And so I think when you look at Acadiana area has typically been an area that was very, 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 very good to LSU. And so I think you really need to, you've got to stop that bleeding. One, you've got to stop that bleeding. Two, you've got to do everything that you can when you have a 5-star at a position of need like that. You've got to do everything that you can to keep that guy in state. Obviously, look, we know how NIL opportunities are. There's only so many to go around. With Colin Simmons choosing to go to Texas, and he racked up on NIL opportunities there. But guess what? That frees up a lot more for LSU to have at its disposal with a guy like Dominic McKinley. And so with him being the lone uncommitted guy in the top 10 of the state, and if LSU can land him, that would give them 9 out of the 10 with only Wardell Mack, who committed to Florida a few days ago. So like you had mentioned, a little bit of work to continue to do. I feel that way as well. And, it's not an ideal situation. McKinley's on his 4th different defensive line coach who has recruited him to LSU. And it's been a year, not even really a year. So it's, there are some hurdles that LSU has to overcome there, but I do think that they can overcome them, that it's not like they're insurmountable or anything like that. It's just a matter of overcoming them over these next 2 weeks.
Before we move on to the recently released 2026 and taking a look at the in-state guys in Louisiana, I wanted to ask you this. And I threw this up on the board, and I think it pertains to what we're talking about right now. I view the NIL as kind of, if you have a bag of money, and for the purpose of this exercise, if you have $100 and one guy commands the whole 100, man, you're putting all of your eggs in one basket. Now, if you got 4 guys that you feel like can equal that value per se, and that's kind of getting into the analytical side of things, at 25 apiece, it might be worth it to go after that. And so, obviously, look, we're not going to sit here and say that Colin Simmons isn't an extraordinary talent. He is. He's a very good football player. When you talk about LSU's NIL efforts, and we've mentioned this on the board, I wanted to get your thoughts on, is that how you feel like they're kind of conducting it, maybe being smart with maybe their allotted pool, whatever that might be? It might not be as big as other programs, but trying to figure out what's the best, maybe bang for your buck, maybe best value out there. I'm not saying this is, bargain shoppers. LSU should not be a bargain shopper in this sense. Where do you kind of sit in the kind of, I guess, the logistical aspect of using and allotting your NIL money?
I don't think it's just LSU. I think you can lump really, all the blue bloods into this category and look at it to where, NFL teams, they have the luxury of having salary caps and limits on what they can and cannot spend. So the way that they attack things is, okay, a quarterback may have X amount of value for Tampa Bay, But over here in New Orleans, it doesn't have that same value because you have Drew Brees. And so I think that, coaching staffs in college football now, when you talk about the big boys, that they've got to look at their roster and they've got to look at their needs, and they've got, and there are some positions that are going to have more value than other positions, which is going to mean some players are going to have more value than other players do. Some are going to cost more, with NIL opportunities. Some are you're going to have to present them with a lot more options and show them, okay, this is where you could make, say, whatever it is. And so you have to be able to lay all that stuff out. And you also have to have, some concrete numbers that you can put at them, because you can't go to a Harold Perkins and say, look, we've got 22 deals that we can strike up for you. He ain't worried about 22 deals. He's like, okay, what do those 22 deals add up to? And that's what kids, and that's what anyone, that's just what that's anyone who's out there trying to make a buck and who's got, who needs money. And so I think that's the biggest thing, because you see on boards, you see some people, some posters will say, well, how come we didn't match, and talking about other situations, and not just with Simmons, but other situations. Well, how come we didn't match? And you can't, and you just can't assume that, that a Wardell Mack, for instance, in that LSU values him the same as Florida does, because you've got to look at Florida's depth chart. You've got to go in there and say, okay, how big of a splash is oh man, it's Napier, Billy Boy. How big of a splash is Billy trying to make to get into Louisiana? Because all that stuff, and it's just where we are in college football now. It's become, now that everything's on the table and stuff. Used to be you couldn't talk about this stuff, man. You mentioned the thought about money, and you'd have other publishers wanting to try to get you fired for insinuating that they're cheating. And it's like, dude, how long have you been doing this? You've been doing this for as long as I have, and you're honestly going to sit there and act like that they're not. Come on, man. So I'm just glad, man. It's nice that you can actually now talk about it. You can speak about it. The recruits, the players, they're like, hey, yeah, I want to make money. I want to get paid, Not that, not saying that it's going to be the determining factor for an overwhelming majority or for even a lot of people out there. But it's going to play a factor, just like when you go to, when you decide whether or not you want to work at company A or company B, guess what? How much money's going in your pocket is going to be a big factor.
Yeah, it's going to factor in a little bit. No, that's exactly true. And look, you mentioned too, people who complain about the players having to do this. That's the exact reason, and this is a whole nother podcast topic for a different day, but it's the exact reason that we saw those teams leave the Pac-12. The Pac-12 could not, with the media rights deal, put physical numbers down in front of them. It was all kind of based off what they could do. And so, look, kids, all the way from kids to administrators, they want to see physical dollar signs. And I think when you get down to that aspect and that truth, there's not too many people that are going to deny the fact that, hey, I feel more comfortable knowing that. So that was a great answer, kind of detailing, what kind of goes into the behind the scenes of being able to say, hey, here's what we have. How do we allot that as well? But look, I'll tell you one thing. When you look at the future of recruiting in this state, we've talked a lot about, kind of the here and now, the present, the next couple of weeks. 2026, Sonny, 7 guys in the state of Louisiana ranked in the top 100 out of this class. You got one guy smack dab, 2 of the 3 guys smack dab here in Baton Rouge. Lamar Brown, that offensive tackle, probably, he's got a chance to be the number 1 player in the class if he continues to trend the way he does. Jakeem Stewart. Sonny, the rankings came out this week. Wanted to get some of your thoughts on this. And, man, how pivotal is LSU to continue the run that they've been on in-state recruiting to continue that in 2025, but also this 2026 class as well?
Yeah, this 2026 class is going to it's going to be a nice bridge for some old folks like myself and some of the youngsters who are just now getting into recruiting, because you're going to hear a lot of comparisons to that class back in the early 2000s, right at when Nick Saban got here. That had a Marcus Spears, Marquise Hill, Andrew Whitworth, Rudy Nicewinger. You go down the list of guys who went on, who helped LSU win a national championship, also spent a ton of time in the NFL. Then you had the 2011 class that had Lyle Collins, Jeremy Hill, Kenny Hilliard, all those guys. It was just a really, really strong, super strong class on paper. Anthony Johnson, 5-star defensive tackle. Then you fast forward to 2014. You had the one with Leonard Fournette, Speedy Noel, Gerald Willis, all of those guys. A ton of hype on that class right there. Now that 2026 class, you're going to see that kind of hype. Because you've got three players who are ranked in the top 10 in the country, and then also ranked number 1 at their respective positions. You've got Lamar Brown, the number 1 offensive tackle, who, if he was if you put him at defensive line, he's probably a top 5 defensive lineman, if not higher. Jakeem Stewart, he's the number 1 rated defensive lineman. He's number 4 overall in the country. And then Blaine Bradford, number 1 safety in the country, who's number 10 overall. 7 in the top 100. And obviously a lot of things are going to change. Some of these kids may not stay in the top 100. Some other ones may jump into the top 100. But, for comparison's sake, the 2024 class currently has 2 players from Louisiana inside the top 100, and the 2025 class only has 1 inside the top 100 on 24/7 Sports. So, you've more than doubled the previous 2 years combined. So that, that just gives you kind of gives you a little bit of that shock and wow factor with it.
When you look at this class, I remember Lamar Brown camped at LSU this past summer, and they had him working a little defensive line. Does he stick at tackle if he continues to put on this weight, or is this a guy that really could play defensive line? Where do you see him kind of shaking out in that?
I think he could. I actually like him a little better on the defensive line, but I haven't seen, maybe I haven't seen quite as much of him on the offensive line, but I really like him on that side of the ball, and I think he could be if he's a Power 5 difference maker, which I think he is, and I think his ranking says he is. He's a Power 5 difference maker on the offensive side of the ball. I think he's a Power 5 difference maker on the defensive side of the ball just as well.
Another names on that list coming in number 4, Bryce Martinez out of East Ascension in Gonzales, Jabari Mack out of Destrehan, Aiden Hall out of Edna Carr, New Orleans, and then a name that a lot of people are going to recognize, Darius McKinley. If Dominic does not commit to LSU, how does it affect the recruitment of Darius? I know it's still plenty of time out, but you mentioned this. They made quite the push when Darius was on campus with Dominic, already kind of building that relationship. But this is not one of those situations where you see, hey, we're just going to talk to your little brother. This kid's the real deal, and he's a great player as well.
Yeah. Who knows, man? In this day and age, say Dominic McKinley chooses to go to Oklahoma or Texas or somewhere, and now you're fast forwarding 2 years down the road, man, trying to project, is a college player going to be at the same program for 3 years, much less 2? Man, that's tough. That's tough. I think if you look at everything, and you say, okay, wherever Dominic would go, that he would be happy there and things like that. Obviously, it would make it a little bit tougher on LSU. But, say he chooses somewhere, and then in the back of his mind, he's like, man, I really wish I would have stayed home. You know what I mean? So it's kind of, you could really play both sides of that. You could put one foot on this side of the fence and one foot on that side of the fence. But, unless we've got that Steve Wiltfong crystal ball, I don't think we can see that well.
Can't see quite that well. But no, look, top 7 in the 100, top 100 right there. It's a class that's shaping up. And like you said, a lot can happen. This is 2026. You could see kids fall out. You could see some kids not even ranked right now just burst onto the scene. But, man, recruiting about to be obviously in full swing. High school football starting here very, very soon, and it's going to be a lot of fun. And a couple of names of note. As we release this, JoJo Stone going to be playing on ESPN tomorrow night in a highly touted matchup. Sonny, it's one of the few things that I wish I was back in the state of Georgia for. Carrollton against Langston Hughes on ESPN2. Going to be a fun game to watch. Encourage people to watch that. Future LSU wideout, JoJo Stone and Juju Lewis, the number 1 quarterback in that 2026 class as well. Very talented young man, too. So, Sonny, appreciate the time. Recruiting as always. Last question for you. Any names that we haven't heard of? I talked with Danny Okoye earlier this week. any names that maybe LSU fans should keep their eye on as the high school season starts to unfold?
I think when you look at the uncommitted guys, obviously, we talked about Blake Ivy. Um, you go down the list, you've got Dominic McKinley. Kobe Black is, there's some talk that he might be making a decision pretty soon. A guy out of Texas, 5-star out of Texas. You've got Terry Bussey, who's going to be visiting in September, LSU officially, and then, of course, also taking an official to Alabama, I believe. And so, he's going to be another guy that you follow. But look, with 23 commitments on the board right now, you really don't have a ton of, you really don't have a lot of open spots that you could go. You mentioned Danny Okoye, that's one. Dominic McKinley, there's some committed guys that they're really in hot pursuit of. Mentioned Weston Davis, Gabriel Relaford out of Evangel. He's another guy. And when's the last time that multiple guys in Louisiana who are committed to other schools don't play their way into the discussion with LSU offers when it comes along?
Yeah.
So guys are going to come along. Some other one, there's going to be a Trey Bradford out there who pops up in January. So they'll give us plenty, but man, that 2025 and 2026 class, that's enough to keep you looking forward to the future right there. If you do think 2024 is almost in the bag.
Yeah, and I think that's a big reason why folks should be really excited about how Kelly really locked down this in-state talent. Whether or not McKinley commits, obviously Wardell Mack going to Florida, but the way he did this kind of sets the stage for saying, hey, LSU, you're really going to have to come in and fight for guys to get them out of our state. And that was something really, really impressive as well. Another recruiting podcast in the books. We're going to have a weekly one during the season talking about visits, talking about anything and everything in between. A lot of news still to come as that. Make sure to keep an eye on those commitments. We talked about Blake Ivy this Saturday, Dominic McKinley on September the 1st. This has been another episode of the Go 24/7 podcast. We'll catch you next time. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you may get those